Afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to get started. I'm very delighted that you're here, and I'm very honored to present a new feature that we've just released in 2023.1, Bulk FHIR Export. My name is Patrick Jamieson. I'm the product manager, and I work with a team that built this product, so I can't really take the credit myself. This highly advanced team of engineers did a great job with this, including the testing of this, which I have beside me Ken Smith, who was instrumental in uncovering all the defects during development so that we could roll out something that you'll enjoy. So here's the brief agenda for this afternoon. I want you to understand the benefits of using Bulk FHIR Export because I honestly believe that this feature will greatly improve the experience for people using FHIR to analyze data and to get data into their FHIR repository from a variety of sources. We're going to show you how to configure your Bulk FHIR server, and Ken is going to give you an incredible demonstration of Bulk FHIR Export in action. So why use Bulk FHIR Export? What's the point of this feature in FHIR? Bulk FHIR Export is used when you need to retrieve a large amount of health information. So you want to pull a large amount of data into your FHIR server. Why might you do that? Because, for example, in data analysis, your researchers or organization may need to analyze a large amount of information because they're maybe doing population health predictions, disease trends, or treatment efficiency, things that you saw in the keynotes this morning. Data migration. You may need to transition from one EMR system to another. So you want to export that patient data in bulk. Reporting. Every health system needs to generate large numbers of reports on population health metrics and quality measures. This is an ideal way to do that. So Bulk FHIR is really the tool for the efficient and streamlined process of accessing a large amounts of FHIR data. In fact, in a study that was published in the American Medical Informatics Association, all groups, payer, EHR vendors, cloud vendors, and researchers, all are using Bulk FHIR for a variety of use cases that you could see here, to different degrees, but there's a commonality that they all need Bulk FHIR. When we look at another dimension to this is the API interoperability standards. And what we see here for Bulk FHIR is that for the provider access API and the payer-to-payer APIs, this is a very critical, necessary feature to be compliant with these government standards. So I want to now turn a little bit to some of the issues that you're going to need to think about when implementing Bulk FHIR, fundamental concepts and security. Here are the key concepts you need to know. First, what FHIR resources do you want to export? You have to figure out what makes sense for your given use case. And in fact, you may want to limit Bulk FHIR to a particular patient group, and Bulk FHIR allows you to do that. You also need to think through how you're going to initiate those exports figure out what their status is and what you're going to do with the data once you've gotten the bulk FHIR export of the data from that FHIR server. And then finally, there's this issue of security. And this is maybe one of the more tricky parts of the bulk FHIR standard, the Smart Backend Services Authorization, which is based on OAuth. So what it does is it's a combination of things like access tokens that you get from your OAuth server and scopes that really define the level of permissions allowed to access your access resources in a particular FHIR server or with bulk FHIR itself. Now, there's a number of things that are not included in bulk FHIR export that you should know. First, bulk FHIR export says really nothing about the legal framework. You have to develop a business partner relationship with the entity that you are doing bulk FHIR export with. If you're a trusted business partner, this probably won't be an issue, but it would certainly be an issue if you were trying to export data in bulk from a healthcare system that you had no relationship with. Bulk FHIR also does not have anything in the standard that talks about patient matching. So one of the issues is that you may think, well, wow, I could just export from 3 different provider systems and I'll have a really complete health information exchange. But unfortunately, bulk FHIR will not does not say anything about how you would match different patients from different health systems. So that's all incumbent then on you, the developer, to develop your matching methods. Also, bulk FHIR doesn't do any kinds of data transformations. So this is not a production system that effectively runs business process logic over incoming FHIR data. Those transformations, again, you would have to do yourself. And then finally, as you could well guess, unlike the FHIR SQL builder, bulk FHIR export is not real time. So we're talking about getting snapshots of data. Now, for many use cases, that's perfectly acceptable. And there are ways in bulk FHIR that you can export from a given point in time. So you could do incremental exports. Maybe you get a base export and then you keep doing daily exports from that point in time where you got your base snapshot. But again, that is, this is not real-time data. I'm going to introduce a new term to you that's part of our implementation of bulk FHIR that we think makes doing bulk FHIR easier. It's called the Bulk FHIR Coordinator. And it's a component of our suite of products that help with export and import of FHIR data. So what you could use it for is to create and manage large-scale FHIR data transfers. And it includes features like scheduling, tracking, and monitoring of these data transfers, as well as support for incremental data transfers. All of these things, I think, help with the bulk FHIR process to make it efficient. And you could see here are some of the features in that. We have things to support different operations in bulk FHIR, like the dollar export for patients, for groups, and we could even do the entire server. And because we support the standard, we do support the Smart Backend Services Authorization. I'll just make a brief comment here that bulk FHIR is a little different than the FHIR resources that you're probably familiar with that are normally or frequently in JSON format. In Bulk FHIR, we use a very similar formatting of data called ND-JSON, and that stands for New Line Delimited JSON. As you know, JSON is or JavaScript object notation, and it really just represents data as key value pairs. Now, in New Line Delimited JSON, each JSON object is separated by a new line character instead of a comma or any other delimiter. And this allows really these JSON objects to be read and processed independently, making it very easy to parse large amounts of data in real time or in batches. So just keep in mind that it's a slightly different format, but it's still very easy to use. Here's kind of an overall architecture of our Bulk FHIR system. As you can see in the middle, we have a Bulk FHIR coordinator. We call it the BFC. And that communicates with our Bulk FHIR client, which is a GUI client that we think makes it easier to use Bulk FHIR. But you are not required to use it. In fact, most implementations of Bulk FHIR do it strictly through APIs, and our system is perfectly capable of working in that way as well. Our Bulk FHIR coordinator is able to get data not only from Iris for Health, but the UCR, but other foreign FHIR systems through what we call pure FHIR fetch. We'll talk about that in a second. So here are some of the kickoff operations for doing Bulk FHIR export. We have some parameters that you could use, the _since that gives you FHIR resources that have been modified from a certain FHIR instance type timestamp, the _type, so you could get FHIR resources only based on the type, like the patient or the encounter, etc. And then we have not implemented to date the type filter, or this would be a kind of based on a query, but that is going to be coming at some point in the future. Let me talk a little bit about the Smart Backend Services Authorization. This is kind of critical to providing the security and the standardized mechanism for application authorization. And it uses the OAuth 2 protocol. So what this does is it allows applications to get an access token to access protected resources. And FHIR resources in a production system would normally be protected. The use of OAuth 2 provides very good security benefits. And the point of the Smart Backend Authorization is to provide this necessary security and standardized mechanism by the standard for getting access data in bulk. If you look at what it consists of, it consists generally of JSON web tokens that have a header, a body, and then a signature. All of these things provide claims, especially not all of it, but the payload provides claims such as registered, public, and private claims. These things give, for example, the expiration type, time of the token, the issuer type, the subject, and they all together then allow the BFC to determine whether to grant access for a given export. And the signature is, again, to verify the integrity of that token to make sure that it is authentic and not being tampered with. So in our implementation of Bulk FHIR, we have some special features. First, we decided early on to implement what's called pure FHIR fetch, because at the time many FHIR implementations didn't have Bulk FHIR endpoints. This is going to become less of a problem in the future, but there always will be FHIR servers that will not implement Bulk FHIR. Pure FHIR fetch is a way around that. So we can get that data by issuing numerous FHIR requests of that FHIR server. We also developed a GUI client that makes it easier to configure bulk FHIR exports and to monitor them and to do logs so that you know, for example, if there were any errors in the bulk FHIR process, what caused the error, and you could then correct that. And we have the ability in our GUI client to pause and cancel a bulk FHIR export because in general, these exports could take quite a lot of time. And so you want to have some ability to control that. I'm going to show you a few features now of our bulk FHIR client GUI that I think you're going to like. So here's the main screen, and you could see that we could set up different configurations to different FHIR servers. So we can export from more than a single FHIR server. We could basically set up configurations for any number of FHIR servers. So let's turn a little bit to configuring your bulk FHIR server. We have some general settings that effectively allow you then to create a bulk FHIR endpoint for when you want to effectively use bulk FHIR APIs instead of this tool. You could easily do that in our general settings. And you can configure the settings and put it under a given name so you could edit these in the future. We also allow an administrator to limit access. So, for example, in this example where I'm showing you a limitation to group export only. So we don't want other users to, for example, do system level exports. We could limit that through this configuration that only the administrator can access, set up. Also, the administrator determines what kind of authorization. Normally for production systems, this would be OAuth 2, but it could be in other settings. We could have other authorization types. And then we have the fetch settings for the FHIR server, the target server that you're going to go up against. We need to know its endpoint URL and its SSL configuration. And we currently support two types of fetch adapters today. We will support more in the future. Pure FHIR, like I explained, is for FHIR servers that don't have a bulk FHIR endpoint, and we also support getting bulk FHIR data from the ODS. And you could configure the fetch settings to determine how fast you pull those resources from the other server, depending on what it supports. And also the fetch authorization settings. You also can configure where that bulk FHIR data is going to be placed, because essentially in bulk FHIR, the data is downloaded as files to whoever hits the bulk FHIR export URL endpoint for downloads. So temporarily, data is stored in the BFC. All of this means there's a lot of configuration in bulk FHIR, and what we've done is made it so that with this GUI client, you can set up that configuration, you could export it, you could copy it, and then you could also then modify it. So in performing a bulk FHIR export, you set up effectively, in this example, I want to export from this configuration a group. I specify the group ID, and if I wanted to, I could say from a certain point in time. And then you would see that this bulk FHIR export request is in progress. Again, this could take hours. So you want to be able to keep track of these. Notice we could pause the export, and we could also stop the export if that's not what we want to continue, because maybe it's taking too long. And I'm not going to go too much into logging, but logging is an important part of being able to track down errors. And you could see this log detail. And then you could also, at the point of completion, you could download all of these files. In NDJSON, each one of these resources is going to be put in its own file. You could export one or more of them or download one or more of them. And I won't go into the audit trail. Now, do you have to use our client? No, you don't. You could use the API that you set up with your Bulk FHIR configurator. And this is typically what a download file looks like. It's hard to see because it is really written in NDJSON with many lines here of NDJSON resources. Well, I don't want to take up any more time because Ken has much more interesting things to show you. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken now.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Smith with J2 Interactive, and for the past year and a half, I've been working with InterSystems, including the FHIR team, and doing FHIR and Bulk FHIR stuff. And I'm going to give a practical demonstration on using this new Bulk FHIR coordinator to accomplish something which I think is going to be increasingly common in the next year or so. So specifically, what I'm going to demo is we're going to configure a Bulk FHIR coordinator and connect it to an existing FHIR endpoint. We're then going to check that connection by performing an export using the Bulk FHIR coordinator UI. And then finally, and this is the big part, we're going to be running the Inferno G10 testing suite multi-patient export test on this Bulk FHIR coordinator that we just set up to certify it as compliant with ONC G10 requirements. And just very small detail on the demo setup. I've got this running in a Docker composition, and normally you probably have it set up a little bit differently, but the main components are the star of the show is going to be the Iris for Health. It's going to have the Bulk FHIR coordinator installed on it. There's also going to be the Inferno testing suite, which is necessary to perform those tests. And finally, I wanted to highlight one of the cooler features of our Bulk FHIR coordinator, which is that it can connect to FHIR endpoints other than InterSystem products, provided that they meet certain requirements. And so I've actually got a Happy FHIR server, which is a FHIR server, open source technology, running in that demo setup to perform the export from. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to the demo. On the left-hand side here, I've got Iris for Health, where we're going to be configuring the Bulk FHIR coordinator. And on the right-hand side, I've got the Happy FHIR server as well as the Inferno testing suite. These are all web applications, so you can access them via a normal web browser. And if you look at the Happy FHIR server, you can see there's a bunch of numbers by all of those different FHIR resources. That's the data that I've preloaded on there. Notably, there's 5 patients on there. This is all Cynthia data, and I've preloaded them on there, so all the data has to do with those 5 patients. And on the left-hand side, I'm going through now, going to the Bulk FHIR coordinator, and you can see I've gotten a couple of Bulk FHIR endpoints already set up. Those are connecting to Iris for Health and HealthShare. I'm going to create a new configuration using the new configuration tool, and I'm actually just going to import a JSON that I have saved off of a previously configured configuration, which is a nice, convenient feature in case you want to reload an old configuration or if you want to move that to a different server. And you can see that this comes pre-populated with all the necessary settings. A couple of the key settings here, I'm not going to go through every single one, but the BFC endpoint, that is going to be the endpoint that is going to be initiating the Bulk FHIR exports. And then besides that, I've also defined a user, which is an Inferno client user that I've given permission to perform these Bulk FHIR exports. So now we're going through to the authorization adapter. So the authorization adapter, that's what controls the kickoff or the initiation of the bulk FHIR export. There's a couple of different adapters available for this, including the basic authentication as well as OAuth authentication. In this case, I'm actually using the OAuth adapter because the Inferno G10 suite requires the use of OAuth with JWT authentication. And you can see down towards the bottom, I've defined a client there, Inferno client, and the method that I'm using for authentication is private key JWT. Now moving on to the fetch adapter configuration. This is what controls the actual connection to the FHIR server. And there's two different fetch adapters currently available. There's the ODS adapter for connecting to HealthShare ODS. And in this case, we're using the Pure FHIR adapter, which is connecting to any FHIR endpoint that can do certain operations. And a couple of the key settings here I want to highlight are at the top. I apologize, it's a little bit cut off, but you can see at the top that there's the Happy FHIR endpoint that I've got up there. And then for the authentication to access that Happy FHIR server, I'm just using basic authentication, and I'm using some stored credentials that I've stored in the credentials registry. The last major setting screen is the storage adapter. So this defines where those files are going to end up, as well as what the endpoint is that users are going to access those files from. And you can see it's going to be /bulkfhir/file, which that is different from the actual bulk FHIR initiation endpoint, so I want to point that out to avoid any confusion. And we'll hit next, and we'll get one final opportunity to look through all of our settings to make sure that we have everything that we want. And if I hit configure, then successfully create configuration. And you can see that there's that third line there that says Inferno Bulk FHIR. And then now just to test it, I'm going to go to the Bulk FHIR export UI, and I'm going to initiate a Inferno Bulk FHIR patient export, which is basically exporting all the patients and all their related data. And if I hit the export button, you can see that the export is now in progress. And this is actually going to take a while, so I'm going to fast forward in time to where the export is actually complete. You can see it's got it's got some stats on there, and notably, it's got the download button. You can go through here and look at all the resources that it's downloaded. They're separated out into their own ND-JSON files, and I'm going to click on the patient ND-JSON just to confirm that I do indeed have those 5 patients that I was expecting. And as you can see, there's 5 lines there. Each of those is a FHIR resource and ND-JSON, new line delimited, so there's 5 lines. So we're good to go. We've got our connection to our Happy FHIR server, so we're ready to move on to the star of the show, which is the Inferno G10 test. So we're just going to use the default settings here. And I want to note that the Inferno ONC G10 test, it's more than just the bulk FHIR export. There's a lot more, actually. So this is just one portion of that. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that what I'm doing is going through the entire battery here. You can see I'm selecting the multi-patient API section just to kind of skip to that section so that I can avoid having to discuss the other stuff. So now that I'm here, I need to tell Inferno how to connect to the bulk FHIR endpoint to initiate that bulk FHIR export. So I'm going to go to the Run Test dialog, and you can see it's gotten a bunch of fields that I can enter. And once again, I'm going to cheat and use a saved JSON file that's going to load up all the desired settings, including the bulk FHIR endpoint that I'm connecting to. Because I'm using OAuth, I also need to define the OAuth endpoint, and I need to specify the client that I'm going to be using. And on the HealthShare side, I'm going to the OAuth server just to show you the OAuth settings that I'm using and show you the Inferno client. This is going to go by a little bit quick, but it is indeed the correct client ID. And I've gotten this set up as a private key JWT authentication for this client. One thing I'm not showing is that I've already preloaded the public key for this, this key set and associated with this client. So when you're going through this process, make sure you do that, otherwise it won't work. So now that I've got all those settings in place, I'm going to kick off the multi-patient API test, and it's off to the races. It's going through. And once again, this is going to take a while, so I'm going to fast forward in time to where, oh, I must have fast forwarded a little bit too far. let's see. There we go. All right, so it's kicked off here. Oh, I apologize. I forgot I was going to talk about the actual export in progress. So as the export is kicked off, it's going to show up in the export UI at the top of the screen. So if I go over there and I refresh it, you'll note that the export is indeed kicked off. And you can see that the user there is the Inferno client. So that is now off to the races. And it's good to go. It's going to take a couple minutes to perform that export. So as I fast forward, why is this not going? Apologies for the technical difficulties. As you may have figured out, this is actually a video. So let me see if I can just do this. Here we go. Yeah, that's showing up. So we are now at the point where the export is completed. And you can see we're green across the board, so happy days. We've passed the multi-patient API test. And if you look on the left-hand side on the export UI, you can see the export that completed for that group, as well as an additional export that says it's terminated, which is expected. That's actually part of the test. And if you go through, one of the cool things about Inferno is that you can drill down into the details of each of these tests. It'll describe what it's doing, as well as what the source information is for that requirement. And you can go down to the level of actually looking at the REST requests and the responses. Right here, it's also doing validation in all the resources that are coming back using the US core criteria. And then the final check there is the cancellation check to make sure that it can initiate an export and then cancel that export, which is why you see that terminated on the Bulk FHIR export UI. And that about wraps it up for the demo. So just to reiterate, we've set up the Bulk FHIR server, we've verified the connection to the Happy FHIR endpoint, and then we've performed the ONC G10 testing for the multi-patient API. And this is one way that you can use the new Bulk FHIR coordinator to accomplish things at your organization. So thank you very much.
Just have a couple last things to talk about. So a little bit on the roadmap. We are working on a Bulk FHIR phase 2. What will be included in that is not totally nailed down, but here are some of the things that we are looking at, is including associated data. So common delimited values that are associated with the export resources that you're requesting. The underscore elements that you could then do even more fine-grained other than just the type, and the type filter I mentioned. There's a number of resources that are involved that you can look up, including not only Happy FHIR, but the Inferno test platform and G10 standardized API. There's all good documentation on this on the web. With the slides, you could click on the link. So yeah, that's quite a lot of material, and I'd be happy to take questions. While we're doing that, I want to make you aware there's a number of other FHIR sessions going on right after this. There'll be clinical research data pipeline with OMOP, how to customize your FHIR server. And then we have a bunch of great topics tomorrow too. Some more advanced, but I think this was a good solid feature that we're rolling out. And then there's a number of demos that you might want to attend tonight on the FHIR SQL Builder, FHIR Facade, Healthcare Action Engine. And finally, if that's not enough, we have a lot going on in the Tech Exchange as well that deals with FHIR, including some issues with FHIR R5 that you might want to get a sneak preview of. So with that, I'll open up for questions. Can you bring the mic?
Yeah. Hi, Patrick. The underscore elements query parameter, will that also be supported in the IRIS for Health FHIR repository?
Can you repeat that? I didn't, the
Okay.
underscore elements, I heard that. What?
Yeah.
What?
Will that also be supported on the Iris for Health FHIR repository? So not on the bulk API level,
Oh, I
but on
see. Yes, that has, we have not considered that yet in our roadmap. So I suspect at some point, yes, but yeah, we have not.
not on the roadmap yet. No, thanks.
Paul.
Could- Paul?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, oh, hey, so,
Becky.
no, yeah,
Hi, can you explain a little bit more about what pausing means? What happens? Like, what exactly are you pausing? What is the system doing? How does that affect system utilization, et cetera?
well, from the standpoint of the BFC, I don't think it's causing any resource utilization. With the Pure Fire Fetch, all we're doing is pausing, actually requesting records using the Fire API from that foreign server. So that should have almost no implications in terms of resource utilization. The BFC can request multiple exports at a time. So it's possible that, I guess, if you had enough different bulk fire exports at one point, you could possibly overload it. But yeah, pausing shouldn't have any effect on it. Oh yeah, when you're doing bulk fire export, the data is coming back into a temporary storage location. So yes, in that respect, those resources that are in that temporary location are taking up space. And when you resume, you will then continue to add to that temporary location. Now, those temporary files can be kept for an amount of time you designate, and at that point, they could be purged from the BFC. But yeah, that's what pausing would do, would just stop effectively accumulating more data in those temporary files. Yeah.
Oh yeah, just a couple more details on that. So what's actually happening behind the scenes is it's transforming it into like fire requests. And so when you pause it, it's going to be running through all those fire requests, and it's just going to stop. So everything that it's gotten up to, it's basically going to store. There's a little bit more complexity involved because there's multiple workers that are performing at the same time, as well as some file flushing going on in the background. But that's essentially what is being paused, the initiation of those fire requests. And also, I think, just to clarify,
Right.
the elements question, I
Yes.
believe that is implemented already on our fire endpoint, so just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that.
I misspoke there. I definitely misspoke. We do implement that.
So for the multiple fire requests that you are spawning off, if there's any resource contention, how is that addressed? Are those resources getting stored locally with these multiple fire requests? And if they're referencing the same resource, how is that handled?
Resource contention, I'm not quite sure I'm following why there would be this resource contention. You mean between like somebody doing fire search and bulk fire export? They're using their operational fire server, and now they're getting bulk fire requests. Well, those two, this is the same problem you would have if you had a fire server that was overloaded, for example. Let's say it had a very high load, maybe many different users requesting fire resources at the same time. It's possible in such a situation that some of those things would time out because it couldn't respond in a timely manner. If that were to happen, and let's say the bulk fire coordinator was one of those users that was requesting data, we would log an error. That would be something that there would be an error, and it would show up in the logs that you lost or dropped a resource essentially.
Thank you.
If within the BFC, when you configure new target responders, you did some OAuth client configuration. If we already have OAuth client configurations and service register entries for target responders, can they be imported or do they have to be kind of manually duplicated?
I can answer that one. So the OAuth side of things, you can create them manually. As far as importing, I'm not sure. I don't think I have the answer to that one. You can also do dynamic registration of those clients to the OAuth server. I'm not sure about the importing one, but does that answer your question?
Well, the question is whether we can import it, because if we have dozens of private key signed JWT OAuth client configurations, we're going to have to recreate those if we want to use the BFC.
I see. Yeah. So.
Oh, you just identified the existing OAuth client that you already have created. Okay, that answers the question. Thanks.
Hi. Actually, I had a question on scheduling the whole the export functionality. So I know, I mean, from the demo, it seems that you can do the time period on what the data should be included in the workflow. But can you schedule as a task, like during a certain time period, you can run it?
The question was, can you schedule a BFC export? Do you have to do it immediately? And the answer is yes. That's part of the advantage of our configuration GUI. You could schedule a time at a future time to start the bulk FHIR export.
Okay, and also, can you run two configurations in parallel in the sense that sometimes, for example, a particular client might have, if you have two clients, one have a different export based on the patient roster they have versus a separate client. So can you run two export in parallel, or it has to be one after another?
No, you could set up multiple the question was, can you set up multiple configurations in parallel and have the bulk FHIR coordinator execute each one of them at the same time, essentially? And the answer is yes, you can do that. You could set up multiple configurations, even to the same server, if it could support the load. That would be the issue. But yes, it can do that. All right, I think we're over. Are we over time? I'm not sure. But in any event, thank you very, very much. And come see me if you have additional questions.